Lewis Hamilton crosses the line at the Hungaroring fourth on the road, and the radio inside his Ferrari opens one last time. "Every opportunity that I give those stewards," he says, "every single time they give me a penalty." Nobody answers him. Carlos Santi has already delivered the news that there is a 5-second penalty coming for speeding in the pit lane, and Hamilton has already fired back once, saying they are handing out penalties like crazy. By the time the classification goes up on the timing screens, he is 5th, behind Charles Leclerc. 0.7 of a second behind Charles Leclerc. What nobody watching that clip on Sunday evening knew was the size of the thing that caused it. Not a dangerous release in the pit box, not a missed apex under braking, not contact with another car. 1/10 of 1 kilometer per hour. The pit lane limit in Budapest is 80 kilometers per hour. Hamilton's car is recorded at 80.1. That single reading is the whole offence, and the sanction attached to it is automatic, which means that once the number lands on the screen, nobody in the steward's room has a decision left to make. It is the 4th sanction against him in 3 race weekends, and the strangest part of this entire story is not what the stewards do with it. It is what Hamilton does next. So how does the driver, with more wins than anyone who has ever raced a Formula 1 car, lose a podium to a rounding error? The reading itself comes from the timing loop at the entry to the Hungaroring pit lane, and the note the stewards publish afterwards is almost comically short. Car 44 exceeded the pit lane speed limit, set at 80 km per hour for this event, by 0.1 km per hour. That is the document. That is the case. Ferrari's own explanation, given after the race, is that Hamilton pressed the pit lane limiter button a fraction too early, which pushed the car marginally over the threshold. At the exact moment, the loop measured it. There is no argument available here, and Ferrari do not attempt one. Under the sporting regulations, a pit lane speed breach in the race carries a standard 5-second penalty, applied without discretion. The stewards are not weighing intent. They are not weighing danger. They are reading a number off a sensor and applying the fixed consequence attached to it, which is exactly why the radio message lands the way it does. Hamilton is not disputing that the reading exists. He is reacting to the fact that 1/10 of a kilometer per hour on a car travelling at walking pace through a pit lane is enough to take a Formula 1 driver out of a podium fight in a season where he is chasing a championship. Santi keeps his voice flat when he reads it out. And we got 5-second penalty for speeding into the pit lane. Hamilton's first answer is the sardonic one, that they are handing out penalties like crazy. The second one, after the flag, is the one that travels around the world within an hour. That is the kind of margin that makes engineers stare at a screen for a while. But the penalty is only the second half of the problem. The reason Hamilton is in that pit lane at all is a decision made about 40 seconds earlier, and it is not his. To see how he gets there, you have to look at what happens to the leader first. Oscar Piastri is winning the Hungarian Grand Prix comfortably until lap 38, when he catches Carlos Sainz being lapped between the second and third corners. Sainz does not move. The Williams drifts across the racing line, Piastri loses a chunk of time and comes on the radio demanding that Sainz get out of the way, and the stewards hand Sainz 5 seconds of his own for ignoring blue flags. Norris makes his stop, comes back out and takes the lead off Antonelli on lap 46. Piastri, now stuck in traffic he should never have been in, retires on lap 56 with a gearbox failure. That failure is what brings out the virtual safety car. At that moment, Hamilton is running second, inheriting the position from the McLaren that has just expired in front of him. He is on a set of tyres he is entirely happy with. The pit wall sees the cheap stop, the one every strategist takes when the field is slowed and the time loss collapses, and they call him in. Max Verstappen stays out. Kimi Antonelli comes past. Hamilton emerges fourth on the road, having been second a lap earlier, and the recovery he needs from there is the one that never arrives. His own account afterwards is blunt without being cruel about it. He says he definitely does not think they should have taken the stop, that the call came literally just before the pit lane entry and he had no time to debate it. He says his tyres were totally fine. He says he was probably going to lose out to Verstappen anyway, but that he thinks he could have kept third at the very least. And then, in one line, he connects the two halves of the afternoon together, saying it just opened up the door to the penalty that he got in the end. That is the sequence. A pit call he did not want, taken under a virtual safety car he did not cause, at a moment when he was running second, and the only reason a pit lane speed sensor ever gets the chance to read his car at all. Ferrari make the call. Ferrari own the outcome. And by the time the 5 seconds are applied, the damage is not the penalty. The damage is that the penalty is measured against Leclerc, 7/10 up the road, in the identical car. There is a reason this weekend is still being argued about a full week later, and it is not really about a pit lane at all. Because Sunday is the second penalty of the weekend. The first one lands on Saturday night, and it costs him considerably more. Hamilton qualifies second at the Hungaroring, 12 thousandths of a second off Lando Norris, on a Saturday where Mercedes lose pole for the first time in 10 attempts. It is, on raw pace, one of the best qualifying sessions he has driven in Ferrari Red. Then the stewards summon him for impeding Piastri at the first corner, at the start of the McLaren's final push lap in the last part of qualifying. The decision runs longer than the pit lane one. The stewards hear from Hamilton, from Piastri, from both teams and review video, telemetry, team radio and in-car footage. Their finding is that Hamilton was travelling at a significantly reduced speed on the racing line, while Piastri was approaching on a flying lap, and that the Ferrari unnecessarily impeded the McLaren. The sanction is a 3-place grid penalty, which moves him from the front row to 5th. Ferrari do not fight it. Fred Vasseur goes on camera and says the team told Hamilton that Piastri was coming, but far too late, and that Hamilton's version matches. He says he was told when Piastri was already at the apex behind him that he had no idea the McLaren was there and that it had been a clean session up to that point. So, a driver who has just put a Ferrari on the front row loses it to a radio call from his own pit wall, arriving a second and a half late. Saturday night is when he writes the post. Sometimes you just can't catch a break, it opens. He describes feeling good through every session and then watching the weekend fall apart. He says going from that close to pole to starting 5th is extremely frustrating, and that he always tries to keep positive because sport is about highs and lows, but it is also about margins, and every point counts. Then the line that everyone quotes. After 3 penalties in 3 weekends, he writes, "It is becoming difficult to hang on to that positivity." He does not stop there, and the second half of that post is the part that gets clipped out of most coverage. He writes that he will not let the setbacks take away from the progress the team has been making, and that with the pace they have, he is hopeful of getting something out of the race. On Sunday morning, before any of it happens, he apologizes for his own mood the night before. He tells the cameras that Saturday was difficult and asks forgiveness for his attitude after qualifying, because he had driven a great session and then got the call at the last minute. He says knowing a penalty was coming was tough to swallow, but that it is what it is, and that he will give the team absolutely everything he can. Then he gets in the car, runs second, and gets penalised for 1/10 of a kilometre per hour. The count in that post is 3. By Sunday evening, the real number is 4, and the 4 of them tell a very specific story about where Formula One's tolerances now sit. It starts at Silverstone in early July with a false start. The stewards judge that Hamilton's car moves before the signal, and he takes 5 seconds. Ferrari's own sensor data, according to Vasseur, registers no movement at all, and the team call the decision harsh. What the onboard footage appears to show is the sticker on the tyre rotating fractionally on the grid. He finishes 3rd anyway. Silverstone almost costs him twice, because a second investigation opens that same afternoon over a yellow flag infringement. That one goes his way. The stewards issue a reprimand and nothing more, and the podium survives. Which is worth remembering, because it means the run he is complaining about is not a run where every marginal call has gone against him. One of them went the other way, in the same weekend, and nobody made a clip of it. 2 weekends later at Spa, it is contact. Hamilton makes lap 1 contact with George Russell at Les Combes and the Mercedes is out of the race. 5 seconds. The stewards rule that Hamilton is wholly at fault, but they reduce the sanction below the standard 10 seconds for a first lap incident on cold tyres. Russell himself calls it a racing incident. Vasseur calls the penalty mega harsh. Ferrari collect a separate fine that same afternoon for an unsafe release that catches one of their own mechanics, who is not hurt. Then Hungary, twice, the grid drop on Saturday, the pit lane reading on Sunday. 4 sanctions. A false start where the team's own sensors see nothing. A collision the other driver describes as racing. An impeding call the team publicly takes the blame for. And a speed reading 1/10 over a limit. Not one of those 4 is a case of a driver doing something reckless. Every one of them is a case of a system measuring something very small, very precisely, and applying a fixed price to it. Martin Brundle puts it about as well as anyone on Sky's coverage, comparing the pit lane call to being a fraction of a kilo underweight at a weigh-in. "You are entitled to be aggrieved," he says, "but the rules are the rules, and it is painful, and it is harsh, and it is still the rules." Which is the honest read. Nobody in that steward's room went hunting for Lewis Hamilton on Sunday afternoon. The number appeared, and the regulation did the rest. While Hamilton is collecting sanctions, a much larger argument is running in parallel through the drivers' briefings, and it has been running all season. George Russell, who is president of the Grand Prix Drivers Association, has been pushing publicly for Formula One to move to permanent professional stewards rather than the current rotating system. The sport currently seats a panel that changes race by race, including a driver steward drawn from a pool of former competitors. In Budapest, that seat is filled by Vitantonio Liuzzi. Across the season, the role rotates through names like Pedro Lamy and Derek Warwick. The driver's complaint is not that any individual steward is dishonest. It is that a panel which changes every fortnight cannot produce identical judgments on identical incidents, and that the drivers are being asked to race to a standard that moves. Hamilton says a version of this himself in the media pen, pointing back at Spa, where the driver he collided with called it a racing incident, and the stewards called it a penalty that cost him a significant haul of points. There is also a detail from earlier in the season that makes the Budapest reading sting harder. It is reported that Hamilton was caught by an almost identical margin in the pit lane at Monaco this year, and that he questioned afterwards whether the timing loops were reading accurately. That comes from a single outlet, so treat it as reported. If it holds, Budapest is the second time in one season that the smallest measurable overshoot in the sport has landed on the same car. The counter-argument is not quiet either. Juan Pablo Montoya, watching the same Spa footage, calls the penalty completely justified. No current driver publicly backs Hamilton's specific complaints from Hungary. And the two sanctions from Budapest are the two least arguable of the four, because Ferrari admitted fault on one of them and a censor produced the other. So the paddock is not lining up behind him. What the paddock is doing is arguing about the machinery at exactly the moment the machinery costs the most famous driver in the sport a podium. Which brings this back to the thing Hamilton actually does, and it is not what the radio message suggests. He blames himself. 20 minutes after the flag. Standing in front of Sky's camera, with the penalty already applied, he does not talk about the stewards. He says, the last 3 races have not been great. He says there have been lots of mistakes. He names them in order. The mistake at Silverstone that cost dearly, then Belgium, then this weekend. And then he lands on the fix, saying he has got to work hard not to give them any opportunity to give him any more penalties moving forwards. Read that against the radio message, and the two things are the same sentence from opposite ends. On the radio it is every opportunity I give those stewards. In the pen it is stop giving them the opportunity. He is not asking for the rules to change. He is telling himself to leave no margin at all because the margin available has shrunk to 1/10 of a kilometer per hour and a tyre sticker rotating on a grid slot. That is a 40-year-old at the end of a 20-year career, adjusting his own standard upward in a season where the car finally works underneath him. He has a win in Barcelona, podiums in China, Canada and Monaco, and he is out qualifying Leclerc in the sprint sessions while losing the head-to-head over full Grand Prix qualifying. The frustration on the radio is real. The response after it is a driver deciding the problem is his to solve. All of it arrives as a bill in the championship standings, and it is uncomfortable reading in red. Antonelli leaves Hungary on 219 points. Hamilton is second on 169. Russell is third on 160. The gap between Hamilton and the championship lead was 45 points on Sunday morning. By Sunday evening it is 50. And 5 of those points move purely because Antonelli finishes third, while Hamilton finishes 5th instead of 4th. Leclerc sits 4th on 138, meaning Hamilton still leads his own garage by 31. Norris is 5th on 128 after winning the race. Verstappen is 6th on 109. In the Constructors' Championship, Mercedes hold 379 to Ferrari's 307, a gap of 72. Now, the penalties have not created that deficit. Mercedes have been the faster car across a full weekend for most of the season, and they arrived in Budapest having taken the previous 10 pole positions in a row. Losing 5 points here and a podium there does not explain 72 points in the team standings. What the penalties do is remove the recovery. Ferrari's realistic path back into this championship runs through Hamilton, finishing ahead of Antonelli repeatedly across the second half of the year. Every afternoon where he finishes behind his own teammate because of a sensor reading is an afternoon that path gets longer. Hamilton's own garage provides the uncomfortable mirror here. Across full Grand Prix qualifying, Leclerc leads the head-to-head 7-4. In the sprint sessions, Hamilton leads 3-1. On Sundays, he has been the better of the two more often than not, which is how a driver losing the Saturday count still sits 31 points clear of his teammate. 9 rounds remain after the break, and 50 points across 9 weekends is not an impossible number. Hamilton has closed larger gaps than that inside a single championship. What makes it hard is that the recovery needs clean afternoons, and clean afternoons are exactly what the last 3 weekends have refused to produce. And the second half starts in 3 weeks, on a circuit Ferrari have circled for months. Formula One goes quiet now for the summer shutdown. The cars come back at Zandvoort in the 3rd week of August, and then go straight to Monza in the 1st week of September. Monza is the one that matters, and it matters for a reason that has nothing to do with stewards. Ferrari have been carrying an internal combustion deficit all season, large enough that the governing body granted them extra development allowance under the catch-up mechanism written into the 2026 regulations. The first of those allowances was already spent before Austria, paired with a revised Shell fuel blend, and it was worth a handful of horsepower. The second one is reported to be much bigger. Italian sources close to the team describe a redesigned turbocharger, abandoning the unusually small unit the SF26 launched with, and put the gain at somewhere around 30 horsepower. Ferrari have not confirmed the figure, and the timing is reported rather than announced, with Zandvoort treated internally as a data-gathering weekend and Monza as the target. Against Mercedes, whose straight-line advantage has been estimated at 20 horsepower or more, that step is the difference between racing them and following them. Monza is where a number like that shows up most plainly. It is the lowest downforce weekend of the year, built out of long straights and heavy braking zones, where a power deficit cannot hide behind a good chassis or a clever rear wing. Zandvoort will tell Ferrari whether the hardware survives a race distance. Monza will tell everyone else how much of the gap it closed. Treating the Dutch Grand Prix as a data weekend is not a lack of ambition either. It is a team deciding it would rather learn quietly in the dunes at Zandvoort than debut a redesigned turbocharger in front of its own crowd at Monza and find out on live television that it was not enough. So the second half of Hamilton's season forks here. If the turbo arrives at Monza and works, he is fighting for wins in a Ferrari at Ferrari's home race with a 50-point deficit and 9 rounds to close it. If it slips, or lands smaller than reported, the stewarding argument stops being the story and the horsepower one takes over completely. Either way, the tolerance he is racing inside does not get any wider. Every opportunity that I give those stewards, he said, every single time they give me a penalty. The uncomfortable part is that he is right about the mechanism and wrong about the villain. There is no room left in the margins, and the sport measures those margins to a decimal place that no driver can feel through a steering wheel. Hamilton's answer is to give them nothing. 9 races remain to find out whether a tenth of a kilometer per hour is a standard any human being can actually hold.